Welcome. I'm back. This is going to be part three of the most important people who ever lived. Now, number 20 is going to be tied. Adam Smith and Karl Marx. Both of them are known for their father, Adam Smith's case, most influential person in the founder of capitalism. Karl Marx's case, one of the most influential people in communism. Just so you know what communism and capitalism is more what you see the predominant economic system in the world today, primarily in America for the most part, where the economy tends to be more free market. That really means, in theory, of course, it means you got the money, you can invest, you can open up a business. The government doesn't really interact with you as much unless, they may create laws, you have to pay taxes. But for the most part, they don't get in your business as much. This is not a video about if capitalism is good versus communism. Communism, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. The government has the final say for the most part. Obviously, you have, like in Europe, where they have socialism, which is a kind of a combination of the two. Now, where it's more free than in communism, but less free than in capitalism. So let's say in Europe, they might have higher taxes, things like that, or maybe harder to buy a property. Things like that is what changes. So no matter who you are, if you live in a country, it's one of those three economic systems. Whether you know what capitalism, a socialism, or communism is, doesn't really make a difference. So because of that, both Adam Smith and Karl Marx definitely deserve to be in the list. And I think even when the world is over, and you're just studying societies that passed, right, which would be this one, they're going to still be influential, which is why they both make the list. I think everyone, and this is the problem I see with a lot of people in the spiritual community, they don't study things outside spirituality. So understanding economics, whether you agree with it or not, or whether you care about money or not, it's very healthy. Teaches you how to think. When you want to understand even things that's going on in the world, or even in your own country, understanding how things are done in a capitalist system versus a communist system, which communism, in my opinion, is probably more dead in a sense. And the Chinese in certain countries are supposedly still communist, but they have a lot of capitalist traits to them. So communism definitely is on its way out, if you look at the way the world is right now. But the ancients practiced a form of communism, believe it or not. The priests or the priestesses were the ones who had the final say. It's very similar to how communism is today. The difference is they were spiritually evolved, right? So that's a big difference. Where today you have someone who may be more spiritually immature than you, who has the final say, which could be a problem, to be honest. So that's why, whether you are capitalist, socialist, all those systems influence you. Every single country in the world, for the most part, is kind of managed under one of those three systems. So Karl Marx, Adam Smith would definitely be number 20. They're tied. Only because from my opinion, there is no right between capitalism and communism or socialism. I think where people go wrong is they don't really understand which system is superior is based on the cycle that you're in. If you're in a cycle like this one where everyone is not spiritually transformed, right, sign up for communism, you could be in trouble. Obviously, right? Because at that point, the government would never be able to be challenged, or the ruling party would never be able to be challenged. Now, people will say, well, capitalism, people don't challenge it. People could challenge the system of capitalism, they just don't want to. In communism, you don't even have the choice. You could be revolutionary all you want, you ain't going nowhere. But in a spiritual society, now it's roles reversed. In a spiritual society, capitalism, as we know it, is like the devil. So a lot of times it depends on the cycle that you're in, and it depends on the society that you're in. It depends on a lot of factors. It's not just about saying which one is right, which one is wrong. That's why I put them both on the list. Number 19 is, now this is a triple tie. Charles Darwin, Paracelsus, and a Sufi alchemist named Jābir. Now, this is a fun one. Jābir, in my opinion, if we were just talking about pure alchemy, pure occultism, be top 5 easily. He probably top 3, one of the most important names that you never heard of. Jābir is such that, in alchemy, they always tend to go into the East versus West. He's recognized in both. Legend. No question about it. right? I don't really get into metaphysics publicly, so I'm not gonna go too far on him. But definitely, I mean, if somebody wanted to say he's supposed to be high, he probably should be, to be honest, right? I mean, he's definitely one of my favorite names on the list. Tied with him is Paracelsus, known as the father of plant alchemy as we know it. Very interesting man. He was one of the first people that said healers have to know astrology. Healers have to know astrology. Very legendary in that. I think a lot of healers today don't know astrology. And from his point of view, if you weren't a healer, if you didn't know astrology, how could you be a real healer? I can see why he says that, to be honest. No question. He definitely, his accomplishments are very hard for the learned man or learned woman to know, because you don't really know about them. You don't really know how important plant alchemy is, or spirogyrics as they call it. Extremely important. He's influential, and him and Jābir. I predict 200 years from now, Jābir probably top 10. Paracelsus probably be moved up to 15, right? If somebody was to look at this list. Charles Darwin now, whatever you think about him, he's influential, no question. Whether you think his theories are right or wrong, a lot of science is based around him, to be honest, about his theories. So you can't escape that, in a sense. So he definitely deserves to be number 19. Kind of famous, so I don't want to really go too much on him. I don't have the time to do that. But him being 19, that's more than enough. For some people, he wouldn't even be on the list at all. It's neither here nor there. I don't get into emotions. When you have certain beliefs in science, he's definitely one of the reasons why. Even history, he's one of the reasons why. So I have to say he definitely has to be number 19. 18 is funny. Another three-way tie. As you can see, as I started to go up, it was started to be hard, man. It started to be hard because, even now, when I put this list on Facebook, people will say, what about this name? What about this name? So, hence, you got a lot of ties. Now, this is going to be interesting. Three-way tie. Michael Jackson, the Beatles, Marilyn Monroe. I mean, what needs to be said? Marilyn Monroe, probably still the most famous celebrity. You could be you could be in a country that doesn't speak English, don't even barely know American culture. You know that name. And it's scary because she lived about 40, 50 years ago. So when I think celeb, first name comes into mind, no question. Whether that's good or bad. Beatles, Michael Jackson, what needs to be said? Beatles were at their high point, they were like gods, basically. No question. When you think of the original boy band or the original rock band that went beyond their genre, would be them. No question about it. Michael Jackson, pure entertainer of all time. When he died and the world stopped, normally he wouldn't have made this list, or he'd be a lot lower. But when he died, it showed to me wow, the whole world stopped. I've never seen that, and you probably will never will. You might have names like Pele, Jordan, Madonna, might be close. I don't really think the world's going to stop for those three, even for a second. Because the world stops for no one. But when it stops for a second or two, that's hard to do. It's very rare that happens. It stopped for Mike. I think that'll be the last time you see something like that. Legendary entertainer, a name everyone knows. People still rock his music in clubs, especially when you go internationally. There are a lot of clubs. America, internationally, they still rock his music in clubs. Just do little remixes, stuff like that. No question. So he definitely deserves to be number 18. Number 17, surprise, surprise, another tie. Mao Zedong, or Mao, China, and Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was a ruler of Ethiopia, king. His legacy will be harder to understand, but to let's say a lot of Rastafarians, they look at him as a god, to be honest. Sometimes in Ethiopia they may not think he's a god per se, but he definitely is a legend. Supposedly descended from the lineage of King Solomon. He's legendary because, in a sense, you don't get that as much anymore. Most people who are talking about the Bible don't really come from the bloodlines. So much so that when people say the biblical stories are myths, it's hard to argue, to be honest, because you have a whole bunch of posers pretending to be from the bloodline of this or from the bloodline of that. So Selassie definitely deserves to be that. I mean, when you look at a Rastafarian, let's keep it real, it's Bob Marley and Selassie. Really? Right? So, no question. Um, Even today, I can make the argument Bob Marley should have been the list. Right? And it's funny. This list being a list that's supposed to transcend this time period and even go into the future, if it was for the present, I would have put Bob Marley in this slot. But because I know 200-300 years from now, people are going to look at things a lot differently, I put Selassie in this spot, in his spot. Tied with Mao. When you look at China, when you talk about revolution, when you talk about going up against the power structure, Mao definitely fits the category. No question. Anyone talking about revolution, you cannot even think about doing revolutions without studying this man's work. When you're looking at China, I mean, even though he would have recognized China as we have it right now, China as we have it right now still wouldn't exist without Mao. Definitely a legend, for sure. No question about that. Next up, Wu Chang, very influential in Tai Chi and internal martial arts. His contributions are very important because for most people, they will never get close to real alchemists. They'll never get close to real alchemy. And when you could take Tai Chi and understand what it is, it's internal alchemy. It's alchemy in the form of movement and how important movement is to rebuilding your body, to strengthen your body. His legacy is underrated in my opinion. As we come in a style and an era of mixed martial arts, we're coming in a time when for a lot of people forget, like a lot of traditional martial artists sometimes go on to MMA and don't do well. And it's because sometimes they forget that energy is consciousness. And sometimes it cannot be used for sport. And he came from a time when the Tai Chi or the martial arts practitioners at that time used to defend villages. They'll be up in the mountains. They'll come down to villages and fight. And they'll fight and beat people who far outnumber them, so they have more weapons than they did. Sometimes even have displayed powers that people would say is supernatural. You don't see that anymore because it's becoming more and more rare to see an internal alchemist or a real authentic Tai Chi practitioner. So he's definitely on the list. He definitely is legendary, and I expect, like a few others, his name to move up as time goes on. Next up, Beethoven. What needs to be said? Everyone knows that name. His contributions are endless. Musical genius. I mean, there's nothing that needs to be said as much. I think a lot of people may not appreciate his work, but his work is excellent. I think, when you look at, for me, when you look at classical music, and even to some extent opera, I think they get underappreciated. I think sometimes people get into this East and West point of view, but when you look at it, he captured the essence of his time. When you want to know about that time period and you listen to his work, he captured the essence of it, which is why, and I think that time period was extremely important. Whether you think that there were greater time periods, where we are now had a lot to do with that time period where he was from. So he definitely deserves to be on the list, number 15. Shakespeare, number 14. What needs to be said, just like Beethoven, he's probably more famous than Beethoven. Some people may say I should have had Mozart instead of Beethoven, but no one would say I should have Shakespeare. What needs to be said, like when you want to study literature, when you want to understand, just how words should be written in such a way is almost like art. Shakespeare, honestly, he legend, OG, whatever you want to call him, definitely deserves to be on the list. For some people, he might be even higher. I think he's one of the names that, as we finish this time period and people are getting kind of tired of Western culture, I don't think people will be able to touch his contributions for the most part. So definitely he deserves to be number 14. Number 13 to tie. We have Napoleon Bernetta. Obviously, Napoleon's famous. He's a legend. And I have him tied with a king of the Dahomey Empire, King Agaja. Now, this is going to be interesting in a sense because, there's going to be people who don't like Napoleon, obviously. Now, for me, it's not King Agaja. Definitely does deserve to be up here. The Dahomey Empire is extremely important, just for their contributions. To civilization, in a sense. They're a little bit older empire. In a sense, not older, I'm sorry. More modern in terms of this West African empire is older, but I don't know if you could find anyone who contributed more. When you look at voodoo, the culture, it's not all of them, but 40% them. And voodoo is a word when everyone knows what that means. Even when you be in China and they talk about black magic, they'll say Chinese voodoo. And sometimes there'll be Chinese people do that, right? To be honest. So, no question, he is a representative of the Dahomey. So, for me, he has to be on this list. Napoleon, what could you say? I mean, he initiate that went wrong, right? Prosecution that lost his way. So that's a lesson in the fact that even great men could fall. Obviously, definitely has some racist tendencies. I mean, no question about it. He definitely abused power, but at the same time, we can't take away that he contributed a lot. And, you know, you could look at him as France wouldn't be where it was without him, to be honest. So he definitely deserves to be on this list. Now, next up, I got Charles Francis Jenkins and then Guglielmo Marconi. Charles, in a way, is interesting in a sense because when you look at what he did, when you think TV, it's from Mr. Jenkins. And in a sense, he was a pioneer in movies. In the way we know it's early cinema, definitely pioneer. And for me, his role up here just because of how big TV and movies are, in the sense that I've said this, I've been saying this for a long time. When you look at American power, outside the military, that's left is the movies. Like the entertainment industry is one of the last industries left besides the military that we really dominate, and no one's gonna take that for a while. And that's actually a way for us to project our cultural dominance to the world. Now, again, I'm not saying we are good culture. I'm just saying that's how the power works. And if you look at it, then you have to put him there. He's one of the early cinema pioneers, you know, and even TV wouldn't be the way it was without him and his work. So he would definitely be at that level where I could say, it's funny, I have him tied at 12 with Guglielmo Marconi because Guglielmo Marconi was more of a radio guy. And when you look, TV and radio, like when you look at modern culture, those will be the inventions that you can look and see how that changed the world. No question about it. TV and radio linked the world before the internet came. That's why, in a sense, I would say it's even more important than internet, because you wouldn't be able to think of a global world the way we think of it now if it wasn't for TV and radio. So definitely those two guys are tied, and I just find it interesting and fun in a sense. One is radio, one is kind of TV movies. So whichever one you think is more important, then that's the one that you put above the other one. But I put them as 12 because I look at those two inventions kind of simultaneously. It's almost the same thing or the same type of importance. Number 11, Albert Einstein. I mean, what needs to be said? In a world where science is known as boring at times, right? You couldn't even name two scientists that are living, let alone, any actually scientific equations. Everyone knows Albert Einstein. Whether you genius, thug, intellectually, whatever, intellectually lazy, whether you speak Arabic, Chinese, Swahili, English, everyone has heard that name. I mean, Einstein is what needs to be said. I mean, his contributions are legendary. And he came in and said, hey, listen, energy and matter is the same, to be honest. I mean, I don't think people really understood how legendary that was. Even now, how legendary it is. When I could take this computer, and this laptop could power a whole city if I could transform it into energy. Like, I don't think people really realize how big that was. And how, in a lot of different ways, his contributions is endless. Even little things. Like, he was very much against racism. He was very concerned about racism. He did a lot of stuff for racism, like, for civil rights and things like that, which don't get documented as much, per se. But to me, he showed that he was a really cool guy. And when I put him on as number 11, I could actually say that. I feel good about that. I know when I put Napoleon at 13, I'm going to get some people who are not going to like that. And again, I'm not going to dictate this for whether people like it or not. But I do think everyone has biases. And I could say a lot of names on this list, some people may say don't even deserve to be there. Some people might look at Shakespeare and say that he doesn't deserve to be here. But I think Einstein, no question. He's legendary. I'm not going to say he's as important as Newton. Newton's actually on this list, but he's a little bit higher. But other than him, he took science. He's responsible for how we see science as it is today. And he's the bar. in a sense. Newton might be more important. I'm going to get to Newton in the next video. But Einstein, after Newton, is definitely one of the most legendary scientists. And in a lot of ways, you can say, as we go on as a human society and as a civilization, I mean, he's going to be known as one of the greats of our time and our era. And there's no question to me that his spirit, I mean, when people talk about great men and avatars and things like that, he may not be an avatar, but no one can tell me he wasn't a special individual and a special soul. So no question he deserves to be in number 11. And next up is going to be my top 10 in video to come. Hope you enjoyed this. Until next time, peace.